Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel and welcome to the inaugural episode of Jessie Recommends Men's. I don't know why I did that, but hey, it's my channel, I'll do what I want. But anyways, this is going to be a series where I share with you some of the works of art, whether it be books, movies, TV shows, or in this case, podcasts, that really spoke to me, that really meant something to me, and honestly kind of inspired me or changed me in some way. And I share them with you in hopes that maybe they'll do the same for you. Maybe you'll be inspired by them. Maybe you'll really fall in love with them. Or maybe you'll be like, that wasn't for me. But hopefully that won't be the case. And today, I really don't think that's going to be the case because I'm going to share with you what I think is probably my favorite work of horror fiction ever. And I don't say that hyperbolically because, YouTube loves hyperbole, but because I honestly think this might be one of my favorite horror things, and I'm a huge horror fanatic, so that is telling you right up front that this is a big deal for me. And that is the Magnus Archives podcast. I know you're thinking, a podcast? A horror podcast is the scariest, best horror thing for you ever? Well, let me get into why I think the Magnus Archives is really just that freaking good. It is absolutely amazing. So, to talk about the Magnus Archives, I'm going to have to do it in kind of two different segments. Up front, I'm going to talk about it sort of as what the show is, sort of its structure, kind of those topics that it covers and what it's about, because I think it's about some really cool stuff. But then, about 75% of the way through this video, I'm going to stop and give a spoiler warning, because I'm going to have to discuss something that happens about midway through the series that really just radically changes how you view the show. But I want to talk about it within this video because if the initial pitch on the show doesn't sell you, the second part certainly will. But it is a big spoiler for the show, so we'll talk about it when we get there. But before we get into all that cool stuff that'll happen later on in the video, let's talk about the initial cool stuff, which is, what is the Magnus Archive? Well, the Magnus Archives is a horror anthology podcast, though it becomes a little bit more than a horror anthology by the end of it. But it's a horror anthology podcast that follows the titular Magnus Archives, a sort of like organization that's trying to catalog and look into all the different paranormal goings on within the United Kingdom. But it's mainly following the lead character, the Archivist, played by the writer of the show, Jonathan Sims, as he's sort of taken over this new role of the Archivist, sort of cataloging all the different finds and discoveries and statements that people have given to the Magnus Archives. And each episode starts off with just Jonathan Sims sitting down and reading a statement from different people that have come into the Magnus Archives over the years, and just sort of giving their sort of stories. And then at the end, Jonathan Sims, once he's finished the statement, sort of goes into what he talks about in terms of the investigation and things that he's looked into. So it starts off as sort of that typical anthology podcast mode where each episode is its own unique story. And I will say these stories are truly fantastic. It definitely is leaning into the sort of Eldritch horror, monster, creepy crawly, not quite sure what you're listening to or what is going on with the world sort of thing. It's all about the things that we see in the dark, the sort of weird mysteries that go on within the world. Some of my early favorites of this series are truly fantastic and sent like literal chills down my spine, guys. Like, I cannot get some of these out of my brain. One of my early favorites involves a girl who she befriends this sort of person who lives across the street from her, but she starts watching him and doing like a little people watching him in his apartment. And one night she sees something climbing through his window. And then, so she calls the cops, but she's not entirely sure what she saw. But then the person who is now in that apartment isn't her friend. It looks like someone completely different. But no one else seems to recognize him as someone completely different. They all see the same person. And maybe that thing that has taken over her friend's life knows that she's watching. It's incredibly creepy, and it's very hard to describe what this show is without having listened to it. So I'm going to play a sample of it for you right here of the podcast that I just described to you.
His light may have been on, but I couldn't see him. And I wondered if perhaps he'd gone to bed and simply forgotten to turn it off. More likely he was just in the bathroom, so I decided to wait a while longer. As I stared at that window, I realized there was something, I don't know, off about it. It looked different somehow, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Then I noticed it. At first, I'd just taken it to be a water pipe running down the side of the building, attached just below Graham's open window. The light from the street lamps didn't reach up to his fourth-floor flat, and the window ledge cast a shadow that stopped the light from the room illuminating it. But it was long, straight, dark, and from what I could see, it just looked like a pipe. Except I've been watching that window for months now. I would have sworn that there had never been a pipe there before. And as I stared at it, it moved. It started to bend, slowly. And I realized I was looking at an arm. A long, thin arm. As it bent the joint close to where the arm ended, I think I saw another joint further down, also moving and bending what I could only assume were elbows. It hooked the end of the limb over through the window. When I say moved, that's not quite right. It shifted. Like when you stare at one of those old magic eye paintings and you change from seeing one picture into seeing another. I never saw anything I could actually call a hand, but still it pulled itself through his window. It took less than a second, and I didn't get a good look at what it was. I just saw these arms, legs, at least 4 of them, but there might have been more. And they kind of folded themselves through the window in a flash of mottled grey. I think that was the colour. It was mostly a silhouette. And if there was a body or head, it shifted inside faster than I could see it. The moment it was inside, the light in Graham's flat went out, and the window slammed down behind it.
As you can see, it's really, really creepy, and Jonathan Sims just has this wonderful, British accent that just sort of draws you in to the story and really, makes you feel the horror of it. This is a podcast you want to listen to in the dead of night. It is truly fantastic. But I hinted that the anthology sort of setup of the series is not all that it is on the surface, because one of the things that I absolutely adored about the show as you get into it is you start to realize that each one of these little anthology stories starts to connect to each other. You'll start to see little connections here and there. Maybe a character will pop up or an artifact or a different thing, but the show doesn't draw direct attention to it. But it does start happening. You start to realize there are threads connecting each and every one of these stories in unique and intriguing ways. And honestly, it builds in one of the best ways I have ever seen a podcast or show, or really any story of this nature, build when it's doing sort of episodic stories. We talk about with things like Game of Thrones or even the X-Files or really any ongoing show with the mythology, that the mythology sort of builds on itself, and sometimes they sort of take swerves or right turns as people maybe guess what the story is. But listening to interviews with Jonathan Sims as he's written out this story, he knew where this story was going generally right from the beginning and stuck to it. And you can see every single seed that he plants throughout the story actually gets paid off, and it works brilliantly. Even if people figured it out, even if there were fans who were really in love with the podcast, who figured out what the story was going to be, they still kept going with this story and stuck to their guns. And it truly rewards people who are paying attention to the story in really, really wonderful ways. Now, I focused on this being sort of an archivist-centric story, but as the show got longer, as many podcasts of this ilk do, as they sort of got more popular, got more funding, they started to bring in more actors. So towards the latter half of season 1, the show actually gets into having more characters come in, building out the Magnus Archives and sort of cast of characters that have come in, or getting people to read the statements to the tape recorder. But what I also love about this is stuff that you really don't think about, like who's on the tape recorder, who's listening to the tape recorder, what are we doing listening to these tapes? All those are questions that you should be asking while listening to the show, and it all gets answered. And I think the cast of characters help flesh that same sort of thing out. Again, it's hard to talk about it without being specific, but it is really, really, really well worth your time. Again, I don't think I've ever seen a mythology of a show work so seamlessly and so well and build so creatively, all within this sort of Eldritch horror mindset. And by the way, within that mythology, it does have a full and complete story. There are 5 seasons of the show. The 5th season is wrapping up now, and it is the actual finale of the show. It is building towards a conclusion that, so far, I have found completely satisfying. It has built naturally up to it. It's done crazy and unique stuff, and it's all felt satisfying, and you know you're going to have a beginning, middle, and end to all of this that has, each beat along the way has felt generally well done and well thought out and well executed. I've not been generally disappointed with any stories. Maybe here and there's some bits that I was like, I don't care for that. But on the whole, it's all built to a very, very fantastic conclusion. The show is also incredibly, incredibly diverse. It has a really wonderful cast of like queer characters, people of color. It's just a very inclusive podcast, and that's something unique and very hard to do, even within the audio format. I really congratulate Jonathan Sims for really doing that work and really building that out in a natural way that's not like beating you over the head with it, but really makes the universe just feel full and welcoming and inclusive, even when, people are dealing with evil, awful horrors going on there. So that's just a one piece that I wanted to mention here. But beyond all of that, the reason that this show just honestly gets at my core and inspires me, and was one of the first things that I wanted to share with all of you, was how it so particularly hits at all of your fears. These sort of fears of bigger than life things, that sort of eldritch horror thing, that like ineffable horror, the things that we can't describe, the things that we can't truly understand, but really hits at the core of our fears in a very unique way. Again, without getting into spoilers here, because I'll touch upon that in just a second. But the thing with Lovecraft, who was sort of the creator of Eldritch horror, was all of the things that he created was sort of these ineffable things that we can't describe. But the horrors here, while they are ineffable, while they are sort of cosmic, sort of nightmares, they all touch upon fears that we feel, like the fear of a spider, or the fear of being watched, or the fear of a dark alley, or the fear of being alone. All of those things are just touched upon and sort of expanded upon uniquely within this show. This podcast was the podcast that made me understand why Eldritch horror is so powerful, why it is so meaningful to all of us, because it touches so specifically on our fears and describes it in ways that we couldn't describe it ourselves. And that's why I think the Magnus Archives might be the best version of Eldritch horror I have ever seen in my entire life. This show is really about using Eldritch horror to discuss fear itself, to understand what humanity's fear is. And honestly, this show really helped me kind of deal with a lot of anxiety and stress and my own fears that I have. I always feel like horror is best when it's helping us sort of work through our anxieties and our fears. And I feel like this show just does that so wonderfully well. It really makes you sort of touch upon any fear that you may have, and it does so in a non-traumatic way. It doesn't like sort of beat you over the head like, like you're going to feel alone. It just helps you process it in such a wonderful way, in a way that I never could have done without this story version of it. So Magnus Archives, I have to say, it's not only scary, it's not only well written and a wonderful mythology, but it's honestly just helpful to me on sort of a mental health level, and it's honestly just a true inspiration in terms of creativity and writing. I don't think I've ever seen anything build so well or so cohesively as what Jonathan Sims created with the Magnus Archives. So credit to him and everyone else that works on that show. Alexander J. Newell, who's the producer of it as well, and everyone who works on it just does a true fantastic job. And it is one of my favorite horror things and one of my favorite works of fiction, period, in general. And that is why I wanted to share it with you for Jessie Recommends, my very first Jessie Recommends. If all that didn't work for you, if you're like, I don't know, Jessie, that sounds interesting, but it's not really my cup of tea, but give me that one extra thing, that little spice to put on the top there. I don't know what this is. This is apparently my chef is like Tony Soprano. I'm going to put spice on your Eldritch horror. I don't know what, my accents sort of roll into each other. It kind of became a vampire at the end there. I don't know what's going on. Anyways, I'm going to get into spoilers. So if you want to listen to the Magnus Archives, stop here because I'm about to spoil one of the big parts of the show. The way this universe builds out is that we ultimately learn that all of our fears, each specific fear, is caused by its own specific entity. What that means is there are different entities sort of out there in the darkness, in between worlds or whatever you want to call it, that control all of our fears. There's the alone, the thing that makes us worried about when we're lonely. There's the I, the thing that makes us worried that we're being seen or being watched. There's the dark, there's the hunter, there's the web. All of these like preternatural fears that humanity feel on a base level all come from these primordial beings out there in the dark. And each one is trying to get through into our universe. And so they have their own agents. Each version of them has their own avatars and agents. And these are the monsters and creepy crawlies that we see throughout the different episodes of the show, sort of interacting with each other and fighting each other and trying to beat each other over and form their own cults and and groups to try to bring them into our world and control our world, to sort of create their own version of the apocalypse. And each being, each creature has their own different ceremony and apocalypse to bring themselves into our universe. And it's up to our heroes to try and stop them. Or is it? That's the question that I will leave you with. But that's it for this first video. What did you think of the Magnus Archives? If you've seen it, do you want to watch it? Did you get excited to watch it? I would love to know. All that's in the comments below. Also, like I said, this is a new series, so please let me know what you think of it. I know it's kind of a looser, unscripted thing. It's more just me sharing what I love about these shows. So if you liked this show, please give it a like. Give my channel a subscribe, just so I know that this series is working. I'd love to hear your feedback on the series. Let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to suggest things that I maybe look at or discuss it with other people. If you want to talk about the Magnus Archives, I do have a Discord server over on my Patreon that anyone who wants to talk about the Magnus Archives can join and help us discuss if you are one of my patrons. And helping me on a Patreon get yourself other cool perks beyond Discord, like you get your name in the videos. My voice is going, everybody. That's the deepest horror that can go on, so sorry that my voice is getting scratchy. But yeah, Patreon really helps me out. But beyond all of that, I hope that you stay sane. Stay sane. That was dumb. That's not even scary. Thank you so much to all of my patrons who are helping me achieve my dream of doing this full time. And especially a thank you to Catherine Lambeth, Miranda Janelle, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Eli Bergmas, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Chamomile T., Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Stefan Schuhart, Wayne Twitchell, Roar, Ish the Mad, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Jedi Indiana Jones, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Nathan Olson, BBD, Amanda Ronye Adanya, The Sir Spence, Jason Knott, Hannah F., Andrew Jorgensen, Maeve, Jasmine, Skylar Gray, Sean Piper, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Subraxis, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Nathan Steele, Tiffany Danger, Mari Neckar, Wendizzle Bizzle, Bush, W. Randy Eady, Mark the Edge, Piston Twisted Garage, Geek Filter, Gretchen Badger, Polly Mina, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam, Lysa, Din, Jacob Tovar, Celestial Dawn, Lily, Andrew Lamoureux, Raina C., Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and Vale Dunn. Thank you. You are all beautiful, beautiful people.